Hello, welcome to Geoeconomic Insights. I'm Andrew Capistrano, visiting research fellow here at the Institute of Geoeconomics, and I'm very happy to be joined by our director, Professor Kazuto Suzuki. Today we're going to talk a little bit about what's been going on in the tariff world. Nearly 4 months after Liberation Day, the Trump administration has this week achieved its two biggest trade agreements to date. I say agreements because I don't know if they're really deals, they're more like frameworks.
Yeah.
But they're the biggest ones, with Japan first on Wednesday and then followed by the EU today. We're filming on Monday. So now these may seem beneficial in that they will stop any kind of retaliatory tariff escalation, some spiral of trade war conflict. But as they say in English, the devil is in the details. So I'm happy to be joined by Professor Suzuki to talk about this today.
Right.
So first, what are your initial impressions of the US-Japan deal? How it emerged and maybe what its impact may be?
Well, I think it was very surprising in a way that there were 7 meetings between Mr. Bessent, Mr. Lutnick, and Mr. Greer, and Mr. Akazawa. But there seems to be no progress in the 7 meetings. Although although there are certain progress in the process, but Mr. Ishiba, the Prime Minister, keeps saying that there are differences and it's very hard to approach. So probably that was a surprise for the 8th time, and it was right after the upper house election,
exactly,
where the LDP has lost significantly. So I think there were a certain less of leverage to move on. But it seems that Mr. Trump and the administration as a whole wanted to make an agreement first with Japan and then later with EU and probably others to meet the deadline of the August 1st. So there were certain concessions, or let's say compromise, between Japan and the United States. Most surprising one was the reduction of tariff on the automobile and the parts. Automobile and parts were subject of the Section 232 tariff, which is the targeting on the particular sector, and it was considered as a sanctuary. So there was no expectation that this will be lower in any way. But it seems that Mr. Trump conceded in return to the Japanese commitment of the investment of the $550 billion and many other measures that Japan will take in order to enhance the imports of the U.S. goods. But it seems that Mr. Trump is doing the same thing for the EU. The 15% on the reciprocal tariff and 15% on the automobile and parts. So it seems that this is becoming as a sort of a standard of the general agreement with the major industries, so major economies. So I think that was the general understanding, but I think it was to a certain extent lucky for Japan, because if the time moves away, then probably Mr. Ishiba will have a much more difficult situation domestically, so that his negotiation position against the United States will be much weaker. So I think it was right timing to do that immediately after the election.
Yeah, I often wonder too if maybe Trump was afraid Ishiba will go and he has to go through this again with a new prime minister or something.
Yeah, but I think that was another problem, because no matter what, Mr. Ishiba will have a very weak position, and it's not yet clear whether he's going to stay or not. But if he's gone, then the whole deal or agreement or whatever you call it is not made in writing.
Right.
So there was no writing and no signing. It was just a verbal agreement. United States has issued the fact sheet, and Japan has not yet issued the official notes, but there are certain papers circulating around the Kasumigaseki, the Japanese among the Japanese bureaucracy, that these are the agreed items. These descriptions does not match
Exactly.
and it has to be Mr. Ishiba or Mr. Akazawa who has to make a deal or to fix these differences. And as you said, devil's in the detail. So I think the detail has to be ironed out. Since there are so many differences, for example, the $550 billion investment. The Japanese say, oh, it's only a 2% is just an investment. The rest is either as a loan or the guarantee of loans. But Mr. Besant has said in public that it is the 100% loans and 100% investment, and the Mr. Trump is the one to make a decision where to invest. So this is a huge difference.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, so there'll need to be some kind of working out. I see the same kind of issue going on with the USCU deal. But before we turn to that, what do you think this sort of deal shows about the early Trump administration's approach to Japan in general? So we have this $550 billion of maybe investment, maybe loans, loan guarantees. Plus, we have a possible commitment of $44 billion to build out the LNG pipeline in Alaska, and then also in the context of the Nippon Steel approval. Do you think any kind of patterns we can see of Trump towards Japan emerging?
Well, I think it's not just the Trump patterns towards Japan, but I think if we look at the agreement with the EU, I think there's a general patterns that Mr. Trump is just starting with sort of a high number, and then gradually making concessions and deals. Probably I think at the end of the day, Mr. Trump will keep the core interest. For example, in the case of Nippon Steel, having this golden share is the final the power to intervene the management, but also it has a lot of interest for the Mr. Trump to invite the investment to U.S. Steel, so that his bigger vision of revitalizing the U.S. manufacturing industry will be satisfied, and he put the 50% tariff on the steel and aluminum. So this is the vision that he has to make sure that this tariff will create more opportunities and incentives for the foreign companies to invest more. And I think it is the same for the for EU to opening up the market, setting up the high tariffs so that as in return to reducing the high number to the much lower number, the United States will get the concession from Japan that to open up the market, increase the export of rice to Japan. Automobile safety requirements will be much lower. Probably we need to discuss more in the detail, because it's not exactly. I think Mr. Trump think that U.S. cars will be treated separately from the other cars, but the reality is not. So I don't know if there's some sort of special treatment or what, but I think it requires more detail and detailed negotiations. But again, the patterns of Mr. Trump is just set the high numbers, concede what it goes, but end with some sort of a taking advantage of the negotiation and get some something that he can say, oh, this is what I did. This is we opened the Japanese market. This is the best deal ever, or best biggest deal in the history, or something like.
Yeah.
I mean, he made the biggest deal in the history in Wednesday, and now he made a deal with the EU, and that's the biggest deal.
Yeah.
So I think he likes to have this the biggest deal, and he wants to show that he's done something.
Yes, it's the art of the deal. It goes back to his book from the 80s.
Exactly. He likes to make a deal. Mm-hmm. He doesn't care about the contents.
Right.
At the end of the day, he gets something out of this negotiation and get the deal. Mm-hmm. That's the best thing for him, and he is obsessed with the deal. He's not thinking of the future of the U.S. economy, or what happens to the U.S. industry, or even what happens to the consumers. At the end of the day, the higher tariff will eventually lead to the inflation that is directly hitting the Trump supporters, and that's not what people are expecting. But Mr. Trump doesn't really care that much. He cares more that he's done something. He made a deal.
Winning.
Yeah, winning is.
So what matters is winning. Winning is the key objective of the art of the deal. But then, let's turn though to the actual real world outcomes of what this win looks like. So we do see, as you mentioned, some patterns emerging. On the one hand, so as you mentioned, we see a little bit of U.S. concessions on those Section 232 tariffs. For Japan, that's automobiles is obviously the most important. Mm-hmm. But in the EU, there was also some semiconductor, pharmaceutical-related reductions down to 15%.
Right.
So that's the first thing. Second, I see a kind of pattern emerging where the U.S.-UK deal, the first one, that had U.S. has a trade surplus with U.K.
Yeah.
That ended up being about 10% with some economic security components. Mm-hmm. I wonder if perhaps Australia, Singapore, with whom the U.S. also has trade surplus, that those will end up being around the 10% band.
Yeah.
Then you have Japan-EU just completed. We have those around 15%. And then the Southeast Asian economies, Vietnam, Indonesia, the Philippines are all clustered around 19-20%.
Yeah.
So you see a kind of three-tiered pattern emerging.
Yeah.
And then the final thing is this serious investment component when it comes to those advanced economies in the 15% tier, from not just the Japanese commitment of 550 billion. Now we have an EU commitment of 600 billion, as well as I think it was 750 billion of energy. Yeah. So 750 billion in energy, 600 in investment, and Japan 600 billion in investment.
Yeah. Well, I think the EU got the concession on the semiconductor and the pharmaceutical, which is not applied yet. Because of this energy part, because Japan has not committed on the energy purchases from United States because of the differences. I mean, the energy exports are coming from Louisiana, so it's much easier to go to the Atlantic rather than to the Pacific. You have to go through the Panama Canal. So for Japan, the energy imports are all related to the Alaskan LNG. Right. But for EU, because of the Russian sanctions, EU is suffering from the lack of the supply of the LNG. They are getting more from Qatar, but also they are increasing more imports from the United States. So I don't know about the details, but this 750 billion purchases of the energy may include already established the contract with the U.S. energy market to import, because no matter what, the Europeans need the LNG from the United States. So it's not a big deal for the Europeans, but from Trump's point of view, this is a big deal.
The headline number is large.
Exactly, 750. That's the largest number, larger than the 600 billion investments or 550 billion investment. So this is again a winning for Mr. Trump.
So do you think it looks like that these investments, is this becoming maybe the price of access to the U.S. market? I mean, I guess in some sense, the whole strategy of around dollar devaluation seems to go out the window. This looks like it's more about putting investment into the United States and maybe making more dependence on the U.S. market for these countries.
Yeah, I think Mr. Trump's first priority is to bring industry in United States. The imports, the exports of energy is also creating more jobs in the shale gas, shale oil industry. Also, the further investment in United States will create more jobs. So that's priority. That's, I think, is a priority. Dollar devaluation. This Stephen Millan's Mar-a-Lago accord is not exactly in his mind.
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, he can control the value of dollar by changing the head of FRB. He thinks that if the Fed lower the rate, then the dollar value can control.
Yes.
So investment is not reflecting on his mind that this is changing the value of dollar. And also, it seems that the market is not that changing. I mean, not that reflecting on this investment pledges because it's not, the details not yet fixed, and we are not exactly sure. I mean, as I said, Japan is investing only 2% of this, $550 billion. So that doesn't change much of the entire dollar supply and demand.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be very well. I think the market is waiting, wait and see moment, and even in the case of the EU, EU will purchase $50 billion energy, but that's already accounted,
right?
Or it's already built in the market. So probably I think these are the things that may needs to be ironed out and make sure that we understand fully about what is the exact exact meat in the deal.
Yeah, so it seems the most important thing is that just, any escalation coming up August 1st has been at least temporarily postponed.
Yeah.
And then, they can iron out these details later. Trump can claim victory. Again, the EU and Japan can get something that they wanted without avoiding the escalation. That's the most important takeaway.
Yeah, exactly.
So looking at the larger picture now. So how about on the Southeast Asian side? So as I said, they've clustered kind of around 20% with some of the concern about transshipment from China, particularly in the Vietnam deal. But how do you think that these the U.S.-Japan, U.S.-EU trade agreements sort of impact the larger trade picture of what's going forward?
Well, I think your description of the 10, 15, 20% clusters is quite reasonable, and I think it's very convincing. For the major economies like EU, Japan, and probably South Korea or maybe India, all clustered into this 15% bands. And the Southeast Asia, probably the most emerging markets, possibly other emerging countries like Turkey or Brazil, that's a different story.
Separate.
Argentina, etc. Well, maybe somewhere near the 20%. Probably Argentina. That's the trade surplus is much less. But anyway, these Southeast Asian countries, the industrialized emerging markets, the 20% is probably the major point. But another thing is that the Vietnam started it, that they just gave up all the tariffs against the imports from the United States. So it's a 0%, 20% combination. That's the same for the Indonesia and the Philippines. And I think this is going to be the case for the trade surplus countries. Those countries with trade surpluses against the United States, and major, high tariff countries like Lesotho or Cambodia, or these are even the poorest country, which doesn't import much from the United States because of its economic level. They will do the same thing. They just, put the 0% tariff and then, ended up with a 0%, 20% combination. Because, at the end of the day, their industry is not going to be hurt by the U.S. exports, the imports from the United States, because the U.S. exports are basically primarily a very high-end products and very high value-added products. So basically, these are not the sort of a competing industry against those local industry. Probably it's more severe if it comes to the China. The Chinese products are direct in competition with the Southeast Asian industry, and they would be. I mean, on the one hand, the consumers love to have much cheaper products, but at the same time, it will hurt severely on the damages on the domestic industry. So probably, I think, from American point of view, the Chinese product bypassing the US-China tariff war and going through the Southeast Asia should be prevented, and therefore all the Chinese product or Chinese subsidiaries product will be blocked with a 40%, and this 20%, the products from Vietnam, Indonesia, and the Philippines are, these local industry will only have 20%. 20% is still very high, and it will damage the industry because they are primary exporters. Exporting destination is United States, so it will be very difficult for the industries in Vietnam, Indonesia, etc. But probably if the Chinese product is blocked, they would have the relative advantage to penetrate into American market. And at the end of the day, the Christmas, Christmas shopping is starting from this summer, and Chinese product will be tariffed 40%, whereas the product from Vietnam only 20%. So they do have the more chances to penetrate into to U.S. market and this the commercial Christmas shopping time.
Yes, exactly. Yes, so it does create that relative advantage, and also for that reason I hesitate to say optimistic, but I do feel that maybe these deals have opened up a further pathway, maybe towards some kind of U.S.-China talks.
Right.
Now, my impression is that I think Trump wants some kind of a deal with China, but whether or not it's a hugely significant one or another kind of placeholder agreement to which he can claim a win remains to be seen.
Right.
So we know that Besson is on the way to Stockholm to meet with his counterparts for a U.S.-China talk, kind of building on the London talks and the Geneva talks. And I wonder, now that the U.S.-Japan, U.S.-EU deals are out of the way, do you think that this kind of strengthens America's hand, or will they be able to approach China from a better position, or what?
Yeah, I think China has a different deadline. It's August 12th, after the London Agreement and the 60 days pause. So there are still some time left for United States to negotiate solely on China. So probably, yes, you're right that the major issues with Japan, EU has gone. Probably India may be the next biggest thing. But if these are gone, then they can concentrate. The Besant, Lutnick, Greer can concentrate on the China deal. The problem is, it's really hard to define what is the win against China. Is it reducing taking off the export control on the rare earth and other minerals, or is it creating, opening the Chinese market? Is it blocking the Chinese products? I mean, there are sort of contradicting interest in the United States for negotiating with China, and at the end of the day, the Congress doesn't like any agreement with China.
Right.
So, of course, this is not going to be approved by the Congress. This is pretty much, I don't know how these things work, but if the Chinese tariffs on the EPA, the International Emergency Economic Emergency
Powers Act.
the EPA is there are EPA tariff, and then there are Section 232 tariff, and then it's very complicated, and the Congress can intervene in any time about this U.S.-China agreement. So it's really hard to predict what's going to happen after this Stockholm meeting. I don't think this is going to be the end. I think the end will be going after the August 1st, and then before the August 12th. So August 12th will be the deadline, but I think in between the August 1st and the 12th there'll be some sort of a framework agreement or whatever that you call it, a deal.
So that you brought up two interesting pieces, which I think would be good to close with, is the kind of larger international trade situation that's going on after Trump's disruption. I think that contrary to what some observers had predicted back in April, Trump has had a measure of success, at least defined in his own terms. And I see some other things that are developing, not necessarily with the United States. For example, we saw the EU-China summit on trade, which the trade component, essentially, there were no results. A day before that, we had the EU-Japan agreement to expand trade and to build in some economic security measures, particularly surrounding critical minerals and this kind of thing. So looking at this larger kind of picture that the U.S. has kind of set off a chain reaction inside the international trading system. And so what do you see going forward with EU-Japan, EU-China, and some of the other players? Will there be opportunity to create a kind of third pole trading agreement, EU, CPTPP, etc., or are we moving towards people tilting either towards America or towards China?
Well, I think that's a very good question, and I think you're right saying that this is the Trump is creating a chain reaction, because this will change the whole dynamics and the whole ball game. I think we thought that we are playing the soccer, free trade. But United States is starting to grab the ball and start running, and it becomes as a rugby. So I think we need to play rugby, and we need to change the different rules and the different teams. And probably I think the United States is using its leverage as the largest market in the world, and this tariff negotiation is basically using this U.S. superiority in a global market as the largest consuming power. But I think because of this tariff, this is relatively going down, and the U.S. will be much less attractive for the global exporters and those players in the supply chain. So probably I think the relationship between Japan and the EU is going to get much stronger, and this is exactly what happened in the von der Leyen's visit in Tokyo. I think this Japan-EU agreement has set I think it's very symbolic to say it's a competition alliance, and make Japan and the EU as an alliance for the competitiveness. So this is the sort of a path towards the future for further engagement with EU. Probably they're starting the negotiation of the EU accession to the CPTPP.
Right.
And probably, I think both Japan and EU seeing China as the opportunity as well as the risk. But increasingly, the China is excluding the foreign investment and the foreign products and replacing with the Chinese products. Right. And of course, this is largely because of the growth of the Chinese competitiveness. And I think this is creating the more opportunities for Japan and the EU, or CPTPP countries and the EU, to work together to compensate with a loss of the Chinese market, and of course the loss of the U.S. Access to the U.S. market. So probably I think both Japan and the EU understands that we both need to be more indispensable in the global market, because the China is the Chinese market is not growing, well, not as growing as fast as it used to, but still, it's a large market, and US, it's still the largest market, but the US is putting a tariff, China is doing the more direct industrial policy. I think the situations are not in favor for us, both Japan and EU. So probably, I think Japan and EU, together with the other Southeast Asian countries and possibly India, all together, to work to find out the alternative way and to team up to be competitive in the rugby.
Yeah. You mentioned India at the end. I think it's interesting that the UK-India agreement finally was concluded.
Yes.
I think there's a possibility for the EU-India one that they started in 2022 to maybe conclude. Yeah. And maybe Trump gets a US-India agreement as well, and that brings India into the equation. Yeah. But we'll have to save that for another video.
Okay.
Thanks so much for your insights into the current trade situation.
Thank you.
I'm sure you all learned a lot as I did. Once again, I'm Andrew Capistrano for Geoeconomic Insight. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.
その船舶の購入に関してもあまり中国に依存しすぎると突然何かその政治的な対立ですとか、制裁、輸出規制などによってその中国からの供給が突然停止され制限されるようなリスクが考えられるかというふうに思います。